Hello and welcome to Free the Mind UK, a chat with a therapist. My name is Dave Carson. I'm your host this evening. My guest today is Debbie Ison. She's a full-time hypnotherapist and hypnotherapy trainer. She is highly skilled in what she does and has a multitude of different therapy techniques to utilize with her clients. Tonight, we'll be discussing the interested area of spirit release. But before I bring Debbie on, we're going to play our intro video. Here we go.
Not sure what therapy to choose? Free the Mind UK presents A Chat with a Therapist. Join us live for an up-close informal discussion of the various holistic therapies available, helping you make that important choice.
Debbie Ison, welcome. It's lovely to see you.
Lovely to see you, Dave. How are you?
I'm amazing, as normal. And it's such a joy to have you on the channel. Thanks for coming on, because we're going to be discussing quite an interesting area of therapy.
Absolutely.
I'm really looking forward to it. I'm just interested how you ended up getting to, in that world of spirit release. What sort of brought that along?
It wasn't something I planned. It wasn't something that I particularly wanted for myself, but my clients had other ideas. So I started sort of a decade ago now, full-time therapist, and I started off very clinical. My business advisor at the time said, stick to clinical, stay away from the woo-woo to build up your reputation. But over time, clients started coming and they started having past life experiences, unusual experiences that are perhaps not the norm. Mm-hmm. And I was okay with that. And then about 4 years ago, I had quite a traumatic experience where there was an individual in my therapy room, and all of a sudden different voices started coming out of this individual, swearing at me, threatening me, saying not very nice things about the client. And I thought, oh my gosh, I'm out of my depth here. Wow. And it was quite terrifying. And I sort of muddled through that session because, when you're with somebody in a session, you can't do anything other than deal with what's in front of you with the tools you've got. So I drew upon things that I learned in RE at school. I drew upon like parts therapy and my knowledge of sort of mind, body and spirit community. And it was horrifying, to be honest. I was quite traumatized by the experience. But also I knew I was completely out of my depth. And also I recognised I didn't really know where to refer that person on to, because there does seem to be a taboo talking about all of these things. Even within the therapy or spiritual community, it tends to be quite a lot of the love and light and nice things.
It's definitely a bit way out there. Peers are way out there.
So I went through a period of shock with that, and I actually had some eye movement therapy to sort of deal with the trauma of that experience, because I'd been in the therapy room for 3.5 hours that evening, and it was like being in a real life horror film. It was really extreme.
Like The Exorcist.
Yes, absolutely. It was proper full on. Talk about the universe giving you the worst experience the first time you deal with something. And I didn't know what to do with it. And I went online and I was asking people for supervision and help because I needed to refer this lady on. Mm-hmm. And this lovely gentleman spoke to me and he said, look, I've been doing spirit release work for 26 years now. And he said, I've never come across anything anywhere near as extreme as that. Wow. And the next thing you're going to ask me is, would I be willing to take this off your hands? And there's no chance I'd go anywhere near it. So I was like, what do I do? How do I help this person? I've got a duty of care. And he advised me to go to the church, to the Ministry of Deliverance. So you can't just call them, explain the situation, which I did. And a week or so later, I was sat in this priest's living room with this other gentleman that came, and I had to explain the whole situation. And I sat there feeling like a naughty child, to be honest, because sometimes the religious community can be a little bit anti things like hypnotherapy. And I thought, they're going to blame me for doing something wrong. Mm-hmm. Actually, they were lovely with me. They were really supportive. And they said that they would take it off my hands if the individual wanted to work with them. Yeah. And I was really angry after that. I felt really furious. I was like, how dare the universe present me with something like that? And my therapy room didn't feel safe. I didn't want to really work for a while.
Wow.
Until one morning, probably about 3 months later, I'd had a message from a lady who I'd helped, and it was more spiritual based. And she said to me, look, you've made such a difference to my life. And since you've done the work with me, my children are settled. My dog that was going to be put to sleep has made a full recovery. Everything in the house is different. And I sort of thought, okay, then if I'm meant to do this, I will. But don't ever give me anything as extreme as that again. Handle. And within an hour, I started getting clients. Now, these clients weren't people that had come because they believed they had a spirit attached to them. Mm-hmm. They were just individuals that were coming for trauma, anxiety, weight loss, stress, to stop smoking, habits, fears. And sometimes these things started popping up. I mean, I suppose I should actually say what spirit release therapy is.
I was going to ask you, Debbie, what is spirit release? That was one of my first questions.
I can read your mind. So it's where an alleged entity presents itself. Now, we're not saying whether or not that entity is a construct of the mind or whether it is something external. I think we all have our own belief systems about that. Indeed. But as a therapist, it's not my job to...
Is that word real or imagined a good one?
Yeah. But it's not for me to say as a therapist. My job is to go with the client's belief systems and where they're at. Yeah. So I do my best to keep my views out of the way. And you work with the spirit in a compassionate way. So it's different to exorcism. It doesn't necessarily follow a specific religious ritual. Okay. What it is, it's working with compassion, working therapeutically. So those alleged spirits that come forward, you talk to them, you have a conversation.
I was going to say, do you sort of divert the therapy towards the spirit?
Absolutely, because if they claim, or the client claims that they're the cause of the problem, well, then you need to deal with the cause of the problem first. Okay. And you're not going to get anywhere else unless that's dealt with. So it's interacting. So if something is identified as something external to the client, I need to first ascertain, well, what is it that I'm dealing with? Sometimes it might be something quite normal that actually it's just that their mother-in-law or their sister's getting on their nerves. But other times it's something that claims to be deceased or non-human. So it depends what it claims to be as to then how I would go about dealing with it. So yeah, it's quite interesting.
Oh wow, that's like it's really interesting, and I haven't really experienced anything near what you experienced when the first time you did it. I mean, what an experience for your first time. That's like crazy, absolutely crazy. Yeah. So how does it differ between sort of spiritual healing and energy work? Is it obviously different?
Well, I think there's massive overlaps actually. I think it's just that the modalities we used. So I'm also trained as a shamanic practitioner. Okay. If I was doing it shamanically, I would be journeying to whatever realms or worlds we need to find that entity and work with it. Or if I was doing remote clearance, I would tune in. This tends to use hypnotherapy most of the time, or working with the mind. Yes. So how we do it in this scenario with the spirit release is I tend to get the person under hypnosis and I ask their mind to go to the energetic origin of the problem. Now, that's quite often childhood. It's sometimes adulthood. Sometimes it might be a past life, but occasionally these external things are identified. And then once they're identified, I'll say, right, I want to speak directly to that external energy. And I'll ask for the strongest one first, in case there's multiple. I always think you may as well deal with the most difficult one first, because then it's going to make the rest easier.
I'm going to have to remember this, Debbie. I'm making notes. This is so interesting.
But yeah, so once it comes forward, I tend to ask, so what's your name? I think it's always a good place to start your rapport build, don't you? So I need to do rapport with whatever's coming forwards and find out, well, how long have you been with the client and what allowed you to connect in with the client? And you might get a story of actually when that client was younger, they were feeling lost and lonely and they called out for help, so I came in. Other times you might get something like, because they're weak and I want to destroy their soul. So you never quite know what you're getting. Wow. And it's from that we then need to further investigate. We're inquiring. So why? Why are you there? What are you doing? And then it's asking, have you ever had a human body of your own? That's the next thing we need to find out, because then that's going to let you know if they're a human soul or if they're something else.
Right.
So if they say they've never had a human body of their own, I then tend to ask, well, do you have a master?
Okay.
And if they tend to say they have a master, that gives me a fairly good indicator they would class themselves as what we'd class as dark force or demonic. And sometimes they might say that they don't have a master, but they might explain they're doing some sort of experiment. And that case tends to be more what would be classed as extraterrestrial. So it depends what they tell me as to then how I deal with it going forwards.
So like what if you've got, obviously you get entities, because I've come across this myself in my work, where I am talking with an entity and it's actually actively helping the person. Case, do you like allow it to carry on its
It depends obviously on the scenario. So the thing is, if there's a being there that's genuinely meant to be helpful, it wouldn't ever be in the person's energy field draining their energy. It wouldn't be causing any harm to them. And it would be allowing the individual to have their own free will. Now, if it violates any of those things, even if it's attempting to be helpful, it's probably causing harm. So in that case, we need to reestablish sort of boundaries and what is and isn't appropriate. So, so sometimes a deceased relative or an alleged deceased relative might come in, or just a helpful spirit. There's an old lady that's wandering around and wants to look after a child that's crying or something.
Yes.
But the thing is, if they're lost within sort of that energetic realm, if they're attached to the person, they're going to start to drain their energy. It's like draining a battery. And then that's going to cause problems over time. So, sometimes they're wanting to help, but not always in the right way.
Okay, because I was going to ask what sort of symptoms would someone develop if they had a spirit attachment, and like you said earlier on, anxiety, feeling drained, maybe.
And also things like sudden mental health issues that have appeared from nowhere, feeling suicidal from nowhere or depressed, anxious, new habits developing, sort of new addictions developing out of nowhere, unexplained physiological things, aches and pains, other issues that nobody can seem to get to the bottom of. Because if there is something there that shouldn't be there, it tends to give those symptoms through the individual.
Okay. Very interesting. Very interesting. Do some of the clients you work with, do they have any preconceived sort of thoughts about entities and the possibility of thinking them into existence? Is that something?
I think that's always a possibility, isn't it? And it's going to depend on the person's culture, their background, what their belief system is. And that's okay. What I find it more fascinating and more surprising is sometimes when the clients don't consciously have those belief systems, or they don't believe in anything like that, and yet something presents itself in hypnosis. That's more fascinating.
Oh my God. Do you know, one of my questions was, have you ever come across any challenging cases? And you already explained that one.
Absolutely, I have. I had one 2 or 3 days ago. Really? This wasn't bad in like the grand scheme of things, but it made me jump out my skin. I had a client thankfully laid down, and they had a blanket and a pillow on them. And this thing all of a sudden came out and started cackling at me, swore at me, and the next thing threw the blanket and the pillow and sort of jumped up. I was like, oh my gosh, so I got ready to leg it out of my chair. Happened. I didn't like that so much.
I can't believe that. Oh my God. But
I've had a few challenges.
Get into this work because it sounds really exciting. You know, lots of interesting stories to tell regarding it.
Oh, it's fascinating, and I love it. I mean, I mean, I'm doing my PhD on the subject as well, because I find it so fascinating, and there's not a lot of research on it, but it's really interesting, and I love it. And the stories you hear from what comes through are amazing. I would, however, say it's not for the faint-hearted. You have to be very quick thinking on your feet, sort of, and also be ready to move if you need to.
Then, Debbie. Are there any misconceptions about spirit release?
I think there are. I think a lot of
it. Like with hypnosis, some people have different ideas about hypnosis that aren't quite true.
Yeah. Well, I mean, some people aren't going to believe it, and that's absolutely fine. Like I said, it's not for me whether to say it is spirit or not. It's just that actually I believe it's got therapeutic benefit. I think often maybe people think of the idea of it being like quite like what you might see on the television, like in a film like The Exorcist. That's not what we're trying to do with this. We're trying to de-escalate all the time. We're trying to calm everything down, settle everything down, and come from a place of compassion. Because actually we need to sort of normalize this for the client that, do you know what, this is an unusual situation you're in, but you're not crazy. You don't need to be frightened. Actually, you have an element of control in this, and other people have also experienced this. Let's work through it together to bring it to a satisfactory conclusion.
It's interesting you say that, because so for people that have this potentially going on, what's the best thing they can do if they've got some idea this is happening to them and they haven't sought any help? Maybe seek some help. Give Debbie a call.
That's the thing. I think sometimes you do need external help. And I know that I would always go to somebody if I had something like that, because I think it's always harder when you're working on yourself to work out objectively what's going on. Yeah. Having said that, there are certain things we can do to help ourselves. So what I always say is things can only really attach if there's a weakened energy field somehow. So that's going to be an emotional disturbance, a mental disturbance, some sort of physical thing going on. So the more we can look after ourselves, the stronger it makes our energetic field. So good diet, good exercise, dealing with our stuff, because we all carry stuff around, different traumas, different issues from the past. And the more we clear that, the better we are in ourselves, the better we live our lives, and the more congruent we are with ourselves. But also it strengthens us. It helps us to feel better. So I think that's really important. Yeah. I would say learning things like basic principles of grounding yourself, protecting yourself, energetic protection rituals, how to clear your space is useful. But if you felt you had something, you could interact with it directly yourself. You could ask it, are you there for my highest good and greatest need? And I would always say ask 3 times, because there's a universal law of 3 that actually when you ask 3 times, you need a truthful answer. Okay. And if you get like a bit of hesitation or doubt, or there's a no, send stuff off, because we do always have free will. We have a choice. And it's not for anyone else to sort of be controlling us or violating that free will, whether it's an actual person in our lives or whether it is something we perceive to be an entity or something energetic. And you can command or instruct something to leave you. And sometimes that's enough.
I did that the other day, actually, because I was thinking about our talk today, and I thought, you know what, I'm just going to meditate and ask if I've got any entities that are, for my best interest, they can leave right now. Thank you very much. But I actually asked the help of like helpful spirits that are helping me as well. To do it, help me along.
Good.
But yeah, you're absolutely right. When you were talking about looking after yourself, and grounding yourself, good little tips. And there's so much information on the internet, isn't there?
There is,
so that you can start working on yourself and stuff. If you haven't got any money, you can't afford a therapist, for instance. There's a lot of stuff out there that you can look at, definitely.
Absolutely.
Now we have got quite a few people watching, and if anybody has any questions, we'd love you to put them in the search box if you can. I'm just gonna click onto something. I hope we stay where we are, Debbie. I'm gonna take a chance here. Sometimes we don't take chances in life, then so here we go. No, it looks all right. Okay, because we're on 3 different platforms at the moment. We're on 2 Facebook platforms and YouTube live. So I'm not 100% sure.
Excellent.
If you put a question in, I'm going to see it. So if there is anyone watching on YouTube, I'd love you to pose us a question so I can see if the actual question aspect of it is working. So yeah. So is there any, when you go for spirit release therapy, I mean, I'm guessing like maybe you've had I don't know, like a lot of people might not won't know this until you're in the therapy. But I was going to say, how can they prepare themselves for a session of spirit?
Well, I think if somebody suspects something, actually, you just need to go in with an open mind. You need to find somebody that you feel is competent to work with and that you trust, because any therapeutic experience is very personal, isn't it? So I think
it is.
And I think also you probably need to look at yourself and think, am I ready to release that? Because I think sometimes these relationships are symbiotic. Actually, there's a mutual benefit there. And if the entity, the alleged entity, doesn't want to go and the client doesn't really want to release it, it's not for me to violate that free will. So I can't do anything in that scenario. So the client needs to be ready.
It's interesting you say that again, because I believe that to some extent, but these things that you have this symbiotic relationship, like you mentioned, and maybe it's meant to be around to learn something. I spoke about this once before on a course, and I got shot down a little bit, because it was a little bit woo woo. But but everything that happens to us obviously happens for a reason, because otherwise it wouldn't happen. It could be just chance. I don't know, but you have to be open-minded with these things, don't you? But
I completely agree, and I think when this first scenario happened to me, I was very angry. I was very frustrated that happened. I was very fearful. And that alleged entity that first came through that client, what was fascinating was I heard their voice every day for a year, and I didn't like that. And what happened is I had a colleague in my therapy room a year later, and I was actually doing some sound therapy practice on her when I was training. And she said, did you feel the energy wasn't right in the room? And I said, yes, I did. And she said, whatever that is, we need to sort it. So I got her relaxed, and she didn't know what had happened. She didn't know about this. I didn't tell people. I was quite cagey about it because it sounds really weird.
Yeah.
And when I got her into hypnosis, this entity came through her and spoke in the exact same mannerisms, the exact same way, knew my history over the course of that year. And that was a bit frightening, but it was that stage that we got a satisfactory resolution from it. So
but you're saying, like, for a year potentially it sort of attached itself to you to some degree.
I wouldn't allow it to attach. It was trying to.
It was hovering around you for a year.
It kept telling me it wanted to destroy my soul, which wasn't very nice, really.
Gosh.
Yeah, I know.
So every day, experience, Debbie.
Yeah, it was a fun experience.
No, maybe not.
But actually, do you know what? I had to get strong with that. I had to get rid of my fear, because it was there. And whether that was my mind making it up and it was still some delayed trauma, or whether it was something external, I needed to overcome that. And I'm really grateful for the experience, because I just started responding back in my head, never going to let you do that. I'll take you to the light before you destroy my soul. And
I think you're well equipped, having all these experiences, That's great. I mean, personally, myself, I've never felt psychically attacked. When I was younger, I used to have terrible night terrors and I used to see stuff like that. So I knew I had something around me, But as I worked on myself and got to a point of being more joyful and like who I was inside, and I never really experienced it. And my belief system is it's impossible, right? But I've got lots of friends, especially psychics, who mention about psychic attack, and it always perplexed me a little bit. Like, that's interesting. I can't imagine that. It doesn't mean that it'll never happen to me, but it's almost as though I've got this belief system that I've created that I didn't actually create it. It's just a natural belief system that can never happen.
And that's the ultimate form of protection, really, isn't it? If you've got that there, but also maybe it's not your path. So going back to that story I told you, I think that entity or that individual had to come into my life to actually guide me on a certain path, because if that hadn't have happened, I wouldn't be where I am now. But maybe it's not part of your path, so maybe you don't need to experience that.
No, I did do some hypnosis about 20 years ago with an ex-partner of mine, and this entity of some sort came through her. And it was like, oh my God, the world is going to end. And she was experiencing all these like awful end of world scenarios within her body, feeling it on and everything. And like you, I was like, oh my God, what am I supposed to do with this? And I can't actually, because so long ago, I can't remember how I dealt with it. But I did deal with it, and like you said, it's an asset to experience these things, because it can happen. It can happen in the therapy room, absolutely.
Yeah.
And if you're not prepared for it, it's like, ooh, for you and the client,
Absolutely. That's why I'm doing what I'm doing now with the PhD, because like I say, I'm not trying to look at whether these things exist or not, but I am hoping to show that, there's therapeutic benefit in exploring these things and having the tools there as the therapist. I think the more tools we have in the toolbox, the more whatever comes forward.
You have got a lot of them, haven't you? My gosh.
Yeah.
And a kinetic shift, I've done that as well in the movement. Yeah, I mean, that's important. It's definitely important. But like I'm a firm believer in, if you don't use it, you lose it. Yeah. So I'm constantly brushing up on therapies that I haven't used with clients for 3 or 4 months.
I'm the same. I think
go on.
My husband's also a therapist, but he finds it quite infuriating, because I'll go on a course, and I'm probably a little bit overconfident, if I'm honest. And as soon as I've looked or listened to something, I'm like, right, I'm going to do that the next opportunity. And I just go in and hope for the best. But I think that's developed my skill set. So I'm constantly practicing these things and just trying to tweak things in a different way, just to see what happens.
Well, that's what it's all about, isn't it? All these techniques, like putting them in a way that you can use them personally through your own being, your own way, if you like.
Mm-hmm.
Carl Smith's a great advocate of that. Make it your own.
Absolutely. Well, it's not congruent otherwise, is it? You've got to be your authentic self as a therapist to be able to help that client.
Yeah, absolutely. So, gosh, I was going to ask you actually what sort of entities and energies, but I'm guessing there's varying degrees. Do you ever get entities that are just like for instance, you might have someone who can't lose weight, for instance, and whatever they do, they can't lose weight. And this is an actual thing that happened with someone. They did the SWAN protocol. I think it was Bob Burns actually told me about this. And the lady couldn't lose weight, and he connected with an entity, and the entity happened to have been in Germany, and was basically starved to death there. So it attached itself to this lady, because this lady liked to eat food, but it got to the point where it was so attached to her, she was eating too much food and couldn't lose the weight. And then when he asked the spirit to go, she didn't really want to go, but he asked her if she had, and you probably do this, have you got a husband? And she was like, I did. And if I could bring your husband here now, maybe you can go off. Do you know that sort of thing? Very interesting. Now. So did you get that, like with Slim?
So get all sorts of things. So if it comes through as a human entity, I will then work predominantly with that therapeutically. So I'll find out often, what happened when they were last in their human body, and get their life story, get what happened to them, get how they died, and then find out, what's the issue that's keeping them there? Is it that they've got an addiction that we need to do some work on? Is it that there's unhealed trauma? Is it that they're frightened of going to hell or frightened of dying? Is it that they don't even know that they're dead?
Wow.
And I will work with them therapeutically through conversations, through the techniques that we use, to get them then to recognize that they don't want to be with that client anymore. So as soon as we've dealt with that, it will be then saying to them, you could stay here, but actually, is it benefiting you any longer? Because it's stopping you on your journey, and it's stopping this client from moving forwards as well. And as soon as they're ready, it's saying, right, well, you need to remove all your energy from the client. You need to give the client their energy back, and you need to balance out any imbalances you've created within them. Let me know when it's done. And then when you're ready, I tend to say a light's going to appear for you. Just let me know when that light's there. And then somebody's going to be waiting for you. Now, it might be somebody that you knew in life, or it might be a being of light, of the highest and purest. And it's just really lovely. So sometimes you get a relative coming through for them and there's that lovely joyous reunion. Other times it's a being of light. It often depends on what they tell me has happened to them. Like if they told me that like their husband murdered them or something, I'm not going to invite their husband to come through and get them necessarily.
No.
It's
Probably
whoever's there.
Chaos in the ethers. Oh God, can you imagine that? It's really, really interesting.
What's more fascinating that I find is when we dealt with that, the client then makes very, very rapid recoveries. Those patterns change.
How quickly do you notice? Did the client notice these changes? Sometimes.
Well, sometimes it can be instant. Sometimes it's as soon as that's gone, they feel different.
Yeah.
But then once that's gone, you still maybe need to do work with that client because there's still some sort of energetic imbalance. So it's working out, well, what else does the client need healing? Have they got trauma? Is there issues from their past? Have they got limiting belief systems? So you'd still work with the client and proceed with the rest of the therapy to make sure that they're okay.
Mm-hmm. Do you ever get help off other parts of the person? You know, like the idea of they've got many different parts looking after different areas of the life. Do you often call upon them? Come on, guys, we've got to sort this out.
It's quite complicated if you've got entities coming through, alleged entities, and also parts coming through, because sometimes they can present quite similarly. But I have on occasions called parts through, particularly if the client has got some sort of resistance to that entity going. So I had an individual once, for example, that had the alleged entity with her since being a baby.
Okay.
And if that entity went, who is she? What's her identity without that entity there? So actually we did call in the parts then. We called in the part that was most closely connected to her higher self. We did some inner child healing. We also called in sort of the more adult part of her to look after and take care of her. So we needed to do that work with the parts before we could then allow the entity to go. And the entity was quite keen to go by that time.
Really? Wow.
Yeah.
Gosh. So is there any other sort of offshoots of this that you end up finding yourself in? You know, like other sort of, I don't know, other areas.
What like?
I don't know. I can't quite get the question phrased correctly.
Okay.
Like you know, like you said, you use the shamanism. You use that obviously, the inner child stuff.
Mm-hmm.
What's probably your favorite sort of technique when working with someone, or is it just intuition as you with the client?
Intuition, it's finding what each client needs, and sometimes it's thinking outside the box as well. Sometimes it's almost like if you do something and it doesn't work, you try something else. But because I've worked with thousands of clients, you tend to be able to know what is going to work with each individual. So I love it all. I mean, I always love the hypnosis because it's so versatile. I love things like the integral eye movement therapy, but it's not something I would often use on this type of.
I was going to say that actually. Is it possible to use that? You wouldn't be able to, would you? I guess.
I don't think I would
get the entity to be looking through the eyes of the person.
Like you see, I don't like it now. So I've changed the way I work with this because initially, when an entity would come through, it would take over the client's body. So often the client would then speak in a very different way and maybe would have movements that they couldn't control. And I didn't believe that was very reassuring for the client or very safe for either of us. So I always do it now where I ask, I'll say, I'm speaking directly to the alleged entity. The entity is going to answer so that you, the client, can hear. You, the client, I want to feed back to me. So it's a three-way conversation. Because I think that helps the client to feel like they know what's going on and they can see the transformation. So it gives them back control. But also it keeps us a bit safer. So I wouldn't encourage something to take over a person's body to do the eye movement therapy. I mean, it's always an option. I suppose if there was something already there, you could.
Yeah, that too. Needs must.
But also, I wouldn't necessarily want to get that close to do the eye movement if somebody was behaving in a bit of an erratic or unpredictable way. Yeah,
absolutely. That would make a lot of sense. Definitely. Gosh, so there was another question I was going to ask you. Come on, Dave. Don't forget it. It's going to come back to me. Tell me more about it, Demi. I think of the question.
So we have the human entities, and they're obviously very different. Some of them are very compliant, some of them are very stubborn. You get all sorts of different emotions coming through with those. So I'd look at similar things like we do with the 3 pillars, with the integral eye movement therapy of, have they got guilt, shame, regret, remorse, frustration? Now, if it's something different, you have to deal with it in a completely different way. So if something comes through and alleges it's sort of dark force or demonic, the behaviours tend to present very differently. So there tends to be a lot of swearing at me, a lot of the F word a lot of the time, a lot of threats. They tend to say things like they want to destroy the client's soul, they want to harm the client, they want to kill the client, they want to cause all sorts of chaos. So that's very different than when you've got something being quite verbally abusive towards you. You have to stay very, very calm as the therapist. So I feel like my primary school teacher training serves me well. I used to be a primary school teacher, and I taught the 4 and 5 year olds. So when I've got that coming at me, I tend to be like, you sound very angry there.
I love that. That's brilliant.
That somebody's very angry. That's because there's fear underneath it. And if there's fear, that makes me think perhaps something harmed you in the past or hurt you in some way. What was it that harmed you? So I'm all the time very primary school teacher talking to a misguided small child, which sometimes actually aggravates things because they don't like that. They feel I'm patronising.
Yes.
It tends to throw them because often when there's abuse or aggression coming at you, the expectation is they'll get that back. Yeah. And I won't do that because I need to be in control at all times. So it's always coming from a place where I'm calm. I'm not going to show any fear because if I show any fear, I can't sort it out. And compassion. So actually being compassionate to everyone, whether it's an external energy, whether it's part of that person's mind, we need to come from a compassionate approach, and that being in that moment is where it is. And we need to facilitate a transition into something else. So yeah, we go from kindness, which is important. And then it tends to be 3 things we need to make them realise. So they always tend to say they have a master, so there's a hierarchy involved. And their master tends to tell them their job and they have to do it. So I'll be starting to say, well, if you decided you didn't want to do that job anymore, what would your master say? And they say the same things every time, like, I'll be destroyed, I'll be punished, I'll cease to exist. Which is fascinating that it's the same pattern through all these different people. That's why I'm interested in it.
Okay.
And so then at that point, I'll explain free will. And I'll be like, well, do you know what? That violates free will. Do you know what free will is? It means we can make our own choices and decisions. And nobody should be coercing or controlling us. So now you know that, you're entitled to free will. So if you don't want to do what your master's telling you, you don't have to. So that's the first thing I need you to know. Also, at some point, there's been some sort of contract made. You've made some sort of agreement to do this. Okay. You've agreed to, say, cause desolation. What did your master say that you would get in return? So it tends to be things like, to survive, I won't be punished, I'll get promoted. I'll get to have minions of my own. And it's a case of saying, well, when did you make this contract? How long ago? And has your master ever given what was promised? And well, if not, when are you going to get that? So it's basically showing them it's an invalid contract, that it hasn't been fulfilled by both parties.
So clever.
So if it hasn't been fulfilled by both parties, it's null and void, it's invalid. So if they don't want to do it anymore, and I'm not telling them they don't because it's all about free will, then they could choose to do something else if they wanted. I then ask them about the light. So I asked them, well, what do they know about the light? And they're like, well, it doesn't exist. It will destroy me. It harms me. Always the same sort of things. And I'm like, well, actually, that's not the case, is it? Because there's light all around you. I've put light around you. You're with your client. Your client's got light in them. And actually, look at me. What do you notice about me? And they tend to say, you're light. I'm like, well, exactly. And I'm not harming you, am I? So that shows perhaps that you've not been told the truth. But do you know what's even more amazing? You're light as well. And if you look beneath all of your pain, all of your suffering, all of your misery, you'll notice a little chink of light right at the core of your being. I want you to just notice it now. And of course, I'm using the NLP language. I'm framing it with you're going to find it. And then when they find that, I'll say, well, as you notice it, it's starting to grow and expand. How does that make you feel? how is it changing? And they start to soften at that point.
Wow.
I'm like,
Beautiful.
as it carries on expanding, it's transmuting and transforming all of your trauma and pain. And they tend to be a lot better then. So at that point, I say, now, like I say, you've got free will and it's your choice. You could carry on doing what you are, or you could choose something for yourself. If you could do anything, what would you like to do? And it's quite sweet sometimes. Some of them are like, I don't know, and others are like, I'd like to be in a meadow picking flowers. Or
Oh my God, I love that.
So it's great going from something that's really angry and swearing
And
to
then all
something
of a
that's
sudden, yeah.
quite gentle. So normally at that point, they will go. Occasionally, if there's still resistance, I'll give a choice of, look, because you've got free will, I'm going to give you a choice. Either you can go into the light, or you can go into a place that's of the light, like a guided garden, but it's not in it. And that's a place where you can reflect, you're going to be safe. And then when you're ready with your own free will, you can transition into the light. Or if you really don't want to do that, you could choose the option of self-destruction. Now, I don't want you to do that, but ultimately, whatever choice you make, you're going to go back to the light because you're made of light. It's just whether you choose to do that with your own conscious free will. So I let them make the choice. And normally they go to the light. And I love it when that happens because it just all softens. And so you get them to like detach from the client. And then I'll say, at the start of this, you told me you didn't have a name, or you told me that your name was rape, or you told me that your name was desolation. Now, because you've got free will, of course, you can choose to keep that name if you want. But if you want, you could choose any name. It's your choice. What name would you like? And they choose something like Alan or Flower or Martin or Peter.
Really?
I find that like really warms my heart. I think it's so sweet.
That's so
and then they go. So yeah. So that's how I deal with those type of beings.
Incredible. And seriously, if there's hypnotherapists watching this right now, this is something to, because you might not know anything about spirit release, but like we said earlier on, it could actually come into your therapy room and just present itself.
Yeah.
How many clients on average in a week would you work this way with them?
It really depends. I would say on average, it's probably 3 to 5 now. I mean, I have a full-time therapy practice, so I see several clients most days of the week.
Yeah.
But sometimes I'll have a week where this seems to happen almost every session, and then I might go for a few weeks where it doesn't happen. Right. And
you might have a presenting situation, and that's when you may go in that direction to see whether it is. Do you always go that direction and find there isn't any attachment, and so you just work with the person as you normally would?
Absolutely, yeah. And this is very much the client. So I ask them to go to the energetic origin, because energetic origin is going to mean different things to different people. Yeah. That's based on their belief system, not mine. So if they don't say anything's there and nothing's presented in that way, I'd just use other techniques. It's only when it presents itself is when I would choose to do this, because it's the most effective technique for the job that we're doing.
No, it sounds it. It really does. Very interesting. Do you I know you do trainings. Yeah. Do you actually train in this in particular?
I think I need to. I keep getting lots of people asking me to train them. So
intuitive feeling that you should, you know, because I think you'd be fantastic with it. And it's a great way, because like when I use Bob Burns' technique, I often start with that. It doesn't work with everybody. It's just one of those things. But when it does work, you know, you can ask those questions because you've got this direct communication with something. I'm not sure what it is completely, you know. I often ask that question, you know, is it something outside of this person's psychological makeup that's actually created? And also you've got the idea of soul contract as well. It's a bit woo-woo, everybody, but you know, the idea is that before you come here in physical form, you make these contracts to learn particular things in life, possibly. So someone might come into your life and break your leg, and you've got to, you know, deal with that for 6 months or whatever, or, you know, a multitude of things. Does that ever crop up where the entity says, I'm meant to be here because they did a contract with me? And if that's the case, how would you get around that? Would you suggest maybe the contract should come to an end now this person is ready to move on? Or
so we'd look at like what's the reasoning and the circumstances behind that, and are both parties benefiting from that, and how were they how are they progressing? And if it's not beneficial to one or both parties, we bring it to a resolution and we bring it to an end. Because it's not always helpful to have particularly some of these karmic ties in your life. You just need to learn the lesson and move on from it. So try and deal with that if we need to.
I guess you can have some, maybe possibly, if it's such a thing, a contract, but it's actually expired, but the thing is still hovering around.
And I occasionally get things from people's past lives that come through. So let's say in a previous life, an individual has had like a jilted lover or something.
Oh, yeah.
But when that lover has died, they followed that person through their lifetime. So they haven't gone to sort of the in-between life state. They haven't necessarily reincarnated. Right. But then they've been following the person lifetime after lifetime, causing havoc for them. That's a bit weird when that happens.
Yeah, and I guess it is because you obviously, with past life, sometimes you've been murdered by somebody, and they can come into your life several times with that similar theme. And as you progress, they maybe won't get to kill you or whatever. You will do something different, and it changes that thing.
Yes. I love looking at things like soul contracts anyway. So if I'm doing any past life work with clients, or sometimes even if they've got issues in this lifetime with somebody that is creating a challenge, let's say that they have a bad relationship with their mother or a sibling or something, I still might go to the in-between life state and find out, well, what is the dynamic that's going on there? Why have they come in? What lessons are meant to be learnt between you? Are there any soul contracts that we need to sever or heal, and what's the resolution for that so that everybody can move forwards?
So is that like turbocharging the time, like the normal time? If they hadn't come to see you, this would be going on, and you're sort of like speeding the whole thing up, and you can actually release people from these sort of contracts that are not needed anymore. I always used to say that about EFT, like with that anxiety. Sometimes you're meant to feel anxiety, possibly, for a reason, to learn something. But I do a lot of tapping because it works really well for me. So I can just dissipate anxiety almost instantly, and sometimes I feel a bit guilty because I'm like, okay, maybe you're supposed to experience that for a little bit longer. Maybe I was missing out on something there in this strive for being balanced and joyful and happy.
I think we're meant to be joyful and happy, but I think that's really interesting. So I do think what goes on in our body is messages for something. So whether it's a physical imbalance or whether it's something emotional, it's a message that's telling us something isn't quite right. We need to do something to change it. But we don't always need to do something huge for that. Sometimes it can just be a tiny thing like calm yourself down. So I think if we can settle ourselves, as long as we understand the learning and the message behind it, then we don't need those emotions. And I love the tapping. So I do EFT and I do TFT. And I used it the other day on myself. So I don't know if you saw, but I was in quite a nasty car accident last week.
Oh, yeah. But meant to ask you about that. Gosh, Debbie.
I was driving along the M1, nearly at 70 miles an hour. I was 10 minutes away from university. And a lorry just decided it was going to cut into my lane, hit the side of my car, spun my car all the way around. So I was then directly in front of the lorry. In its lane, the lorry then hit me again. I spun all the way around and crashed into the barrier at the side. So 40-ton lorry hit my car twice this tiny Toyota Igo. And I just jumped straight out of the car. I've got a tiny cut on my knee. That's the only injury. And I'm a bit achy. But straight away, called 999 and the therapy head came on. And I said, I can't hear you. It's really windy. There's 4 lanes of traffic. I need you to listen. This is where I am. I need you to get somebody here.
I love it.
The next thing I did is that the lorry driver got out of his vehicle and I ran to him and I gave him a great big hug. And I kept reassuring him for the 2.5 hours I was stuck on the M1 that actually, do you know what? It's okay. I'm the best person you could have possibly hit. I'm not injured. I'm fine. You're okay. Yes, my vehicle's a write-off. Your lorry's fairly okay, but I'm kind. I'm not angry at you. I'm not cross at you. I'm not upset at you. I just want you to be okay. And we did some tapping. I did some tapping at the side of the road because I thought, do you know what? I don't want to go away with
I was going
feeling
to ask
traumatized.
you, like, what was your emotions like? Because I mean, it is an example. I had a tattoo on my chest. It was very painful, and I could see my body going into shock. And I was like, oh, come on, I know what's going on here. So obviously, I was doing some tapping in the chair, to relax it all. So did you?
I think it's really interesting because what happened is I was stuck at the side of the road for 2.5 hours. And by the time the recovery vehicle rang me to say that they were nearly there, they basically said what they were going to do is they were going to take me home in convoy. So they were going to drop me off at Leicester Services, leave me in the broken car there. Then another vehicle would come later on and get me, leave me somewhere else. And then another one. I thought, do you know what? I'm not spending all day and possibly all evening stuck with strangers in cars at service stations. So instead, I rang one of my very good friends at the university, and luckily, the recovery man took me. I went to university, and I got there in time for my meeting at lunchtime. Went to my meeting, and I think everybody was a bit shocked how happy I was. Had a lovely day. Spent the evening with a lovely friend, and then went home, and I was all right for a few days. And I think I dealt with the actual trauma there and then. I did some eye movements on myself. I did some tapping. So the actual car accident itself was fine. I did have a bit of a delayed reaction on the Tuesday. So I'd gone to pick up a parcel from my neighbour's house, and we live at the side of a 60-mile-an-hour road. And actually, the cars driving past me and the sound of them is not something I processed. So it wasn't the car accident I needed to deal with. It was actually the being stood at the side of a road, needing a wee, being hungry, thinking, is somebody going to rescue me? Am I going to get hit by another car? I hadn't processed that. So once again, did some tapping on it, did some eye movement therapy, and I'm fine.
Yeah, I always use with tapping. I always use the analogy of the spider. If you're scared of spiders, you've got to tap on it looking all fairy, and you've got to tap on it dropping on you, or tap it on moving quickly. Tap on it, or every possible angle of fear. We do have somebody here to put this on here, Debbie. See what it says. Hi, my first time listener. I'm finding this a very interesting chat. I missed the beginning, but I'm hoping I'll be able to go back and listen from the start later. Well, Fiona, thank you so much. You will be able to go back to the beginning. It is being recorded, definitely. But I hope so. Anyway, if it's not, I'll make sure it's on there. So that's a good. Thank you for watching, Fiona. And if you want to, if you're watching on you watch it on Facebook, if you want to go to the YouTube channel and follow us, it'd be amazing, because you know what it's like. The more people that follow you, the more people get to watch these talks.
Absolutely.
And it just gives people, because there's lots of people out there with problems, as you well know, Debbie, and they're thinking, what sort of therapy do I need? And it's great to have different people on discussing what they do. It gives people watch it, gives them a bit of an overview, an idea of what, well, it's often like we talked about before, it's about rapport and stuff. You have a feeling, you watch something, you think, oh, I could really work with Debbie, she's amazing. I recommend anyone work with you with this, because I can absolutely tell you know your stuff. I can tell you're diligent in your your ways of working with it. It's really
Thank
cool.
you.
And also, Debbie, I'm going to put up this. There's Debbie's website there. Oh, and it's interesting as well, Debbie, because when we first met, it was the other way around, wasn't it? You were interviewing me.
For my podcast.
Yeah, well, yeah, so it's nice that we can do this. It's really, really
Absolutely.
Cool. I'll just find that and put it on. Yeah. You can tell I haven't done one of these podcasts for a few months, everyone. I'm a little bit rusty. So I'm just trying to find your training. So, if there's anyone out there, do you train hypnotherapy, Debbie?
I do. So I train hypnotherapists. I run an accredited course by the GHSC. I run it once a year. It's a 20-day in-person course. It's completely practical based. So it's technique based, because I want therapists to be successful. I want them to be competent and ethical. So it's great. I'm very privileged to be able to train lots of hypnotherapists. I also train past life regression therapists, those individuals that want to look at that in a much deeper level, looking at sort of the soul's journey, looking at sort of in between life states, unusual past lives, all of those other things that often don't get covered on a course. And I also teach Reiki, and I'm an NLP trainer as well. I'm not currently running an NLP course because I'm quite busy with all the stuff that I'm doing as it is.
I don't know how you do it, really. How do you do it? I mean, I do. I don't really struggle. I believe I struggle sometimes, with retaining the information. If I don't use it, I tend to lose it. But you must have some fantastic way of holding on to all this stuff and, putting it across in a beautiful way so your work seamlessly.
I think it's like, I mean, I don't think my brain's as good as it used to be. Like, since I've had kids, I think that it has declined somewhat. But I think it's my background in primary school teaching that really helps, because the school that I worked in, it was an area of deprivation. And each year I had 70% of my class didn't speak any English. Wow. I had 40 to 50% of the children on sort of some level of SEN, special needs. There was a lot of child protection issues as well. So I had to be very, very creative in delivering a curriculum, because children had to be at a certain level by the end of the year, regardless of whether they had those obstacles. So you start to think about the visual, the auditory, the kinesthetic, different ways to explain complicated things in a very simple way. And I think that has really served me well. It gave me a really good underpinning for them being a therapist to help my clients understand, but also for training people.
Yeah, of course. I love that. I love the way you have these synchronicities in life, and like you're doing something and then you realize, actually, this is all going to be part of this in the future. I love that. It's like, it's what makes life so exciting.
Fascinating, isn't it? And I think the more I think about that, I think how much of this, I do believe we have free will. I think we have a choice. But actually, how much of it have we already chosen? And it's our past. And I think we might deviate from those paths, but ultimately we come back to them. And like you say, those synchronicities, it's just spotting them, it's noticing them, and then going with what intuitively feels right. And it's fascinating.
And again, it's like education, isn't it? There are lots of stuff out there that is absolutely free, that you can be more in tune with yourself, and you can really sort of build yourself up so that you can get to that point.
But I think that's about having a curiosity, isn't it? It's about honouring yourself for where you are and knowing that you could be somewhere else if you want to be. It's knowing that actually just because you've had a belief system or something's happened to you doesn't mean you need to keep having that. Absolutely. But also, I think, going back to the education side, I think it's a shame the way we're educated in this country is very low level. It's about facts, statistics, following a certain model.
Being a teacher, you would know, Debbie.
But I think what we should be instilling in everyone is a curiosity and a love of learning. So actually, whereas adults, we can choose what we learn. So we can go and learn a course if we want to go and learn a course. We can go and learn a new skill or a new hobby, whether it's watching a YouTube video, whether it's reading a book, whether it's having a conversation. But if you have a love of learning, I think you also need to have that love of learning for yourself, because actually you're the most fantastic, fascinating thing you'll ever learn about. So it's being open to those experiences.
My daughter actually went to homeschool. We did homeschool, and it was my ex-wife that actually did it, to be fair. I did sort of get involved in some way, but we were able to really focus in on our passions and spend as much time as we wanted, really, to within a reasonable extent on that, But and like school, you often, I've never quite understood it. I never did very well in school. I left school about 14. And just like roamed the fields in the mountains or whatever. A bit like checking out. But it just didn't. It just wasn't right time for me, and I think there's an element of that. We're digressing a bit here.
That's okay. I think it all feeds back, doesn't it? Because I think we have these expectations from the moment we're born, whether it's from our parents, whether it's from our friends, whether it's from the education system. And how many of us often feel like we're failing, we're not good enough, we're stupid, we're inferior. And actually, that's not because of anything within us. That's because we've taken something external and we've internalized it. And I think the education system, like lots of things in our society, doesn't really work. And I think, like you said, by following your passions, what you did with your daughter, that's amazing, because you can learn all different areas from whatever you're.
I taught my daughters EFT. I've done lots of stuff with them, IEMT, and I think more children should know about these things, and that's what that was what I was saying. That there's a big lack of education in it, and I think, in some regards, conspiracy-wise thinking, if you like, maybe it's designed like that. I mean, imagine if we were all in our power, and
oh wow.
imagine what the world would be like. And I find it fascinating as well because, as you know, I'm quite passionate about programs and self-talk and programs we develop, and there is a way out of it, like you said.
Absolutely.
Definitely.
And I think that's everything you do, isn't it?
It is. So any parents out there, that are maybe struggling, if you go and find something to help yourself. There's so much stuff out there that you can utilize to help yourself. Definitely. Yeah. So to close this, Debbie, can you think of anything else that might be of sort of interest to the viewers? Sort of the last bit.
I could talk forever. So going back to the spirit release, I just think it's being open to the idea of this. It's not necessarily saying this is something external. Different people are going to believe different things. What it is thinking is actually what will benefit the individual. And if somebody is presenting with the idea that there is something that is not of themselves, that's influencing them in some way or another, then what we should be doing is we should be working with where the client's at. And that's regardless of whether it's an alleged entity or anything. We should always be working with the individual, with where they're at, and guiding them to where they need to be. So I would say to anybody that's looking for therapy, choose a person that you feel comfortable with and that resonates with you. That's really important. Explore some different therapies as well, because just because one therapy doesn't work for you doesn't mean there isn't going to be another therapy out there that is successful or isn't successful. So just keep being open to it, and go on your individual journeys and be open. Just explore, be curious.
Love it, Debbie, love it. And I want to say thank you so much for coming on tonight. It's a fascinating area of work, and it's food for thought. And there's going to be lots of people watching the video, the recording, and I just hope it touches some people, and they get in contact with you because they'll be in good hands with you.
Thank
Definitely.
you.
Personally, if I ever get psychically attacked, I will be giving you a call straight away.
I think you're such a ray of sunshine. Hopefully it'll never happen. I'm so happy to help.
Likewise. Well, look, thanks again for coming on.
Thank you.
Thank you to everyone that's been watching. Thank you for little messages. And we will be back next week. We're going to be talking about medicinal aspects of mushrooms with Wesley Brown. It's going to be quite interesting, and that's it. So everyone that's watching, thank you so much. If you get a chance to give us a follow or a like on the YouTube channel, Free the Mind UK Chat with a Therapist, it'd be great if you could. It just helps the whole thing move along lovely. And I wish you all good night. Thank you.
Bye.